Hello everyone, it's Ty. Today I thought it timely to do a guide for our blasphemous great performer, Anaxagoras. Anaxa is the first of his kind, being a wind erudition character, a combination once considered as elusive as the quantum male character, or lightning preservation, or I guess wind preservation, or preservation characters of any kind, frankly. His mechanics are also quite unique in that they are wildly misleading. While his kit seems to revolve around weakness implants and Death Shred, leading some to think that he's an AoE Silverwolf, at his core, he's really just a hypercarry DPS with some erudition support capabilities. His basic attack is a basic attack. Single target, does 100% attack to a single enemy, old hat. But his skill is rather interesting. While it's actually technically a bounce skill, dealing 70% attack to one enemy and bouncing 4 additional times, it has a special mechanic to prioritize bouncing to targets that have not yet been hit. So in practice, it will always hit every enemy at least once, like an AoE skill. Additionally, its damage is increased by 20% for each enemy on the field. So, when fighting a full field of enemies, like in Pure Fiction, his damage won't be so egregiously diluted due to the bounce, like some Lightning Lords I know. Finally, his ultimate is also another bit of flim-flam. It does 160% attack to all enemies and inflicts sublimation. In this state, enemies have all of the weaknesses and are unable to take action. Now that sounds amazing. 100% guaranteed weakness implants like an AoE Silverwolf and action delay like Welt? But sadly no. It only lasts until the start of the target's turn and doesn't do any kind of action delay. You're thinking, but wait, since enemies can't take action until their turn anyway, and this state ends at the start of an enemy's turn, then it doesn't actually do anything, does it? Exactly. As expected of the great performer, it's just another misdirection. Its actual purpose is to ensure enemies have maximum weakness to guarantee the activation of his talent and major trace when he deals damage. The truth is fully revealed with his talent. Every time he hits an enemy, whether with basic, ultimate, or each bounce of his skill, he inflicts a random weakness on that enemy. And when an enemy reaches 5 weaknesses, it enters the qualitative disclosure state, in which Anaxa, and only Anaxa, deals 30% increased damage to that enemy. Additionally, using basic or skill on an enemy with qualitative disclosure causes an additional skill to be fired off, which costs no skill points. That's it. The weaknesses he implants are just weaknesses and don't affect the enemy's resistances the way an enemy's natural weaknesses or weaknesses implanted by Silverwolf would have. So, beyond making it easier for his teammates to contribute to a break, they aren't really as impactful as they seem. At least for the rest of his team, because he does gain power from them, and even more so with his major traces. With Qualitative Shift, every weakness on an enemy up to 7 weaknesses allows Anaxa to ignore 4% defense when attacking that enemy. So, keeping his ult up regularly means enemies will constantly have all 7 weaknesses, and he'll ignore 28% defense against them. But again, this is simply def ignore for his personal damage. It doesn't help his teammates. Keeping that ult up is made a bit easier with Roaming Signifier, because he gains additional energy when he uses a basic attack, and at the start of each turn when there are no enemies on the field with qualitative disclosure. Lastly, the only actual support capabilities in his base kit are specifically in his third major trace, Imperative Hiatus. With it, if Anaxa is the only erudition character in the team, his personal crit damage increases by 140%. However, if there are 2 or more erudition characters, so himself and any other erudition, then he increases everyone's damage by 50%. It's a rather clever way to ensure his viability as a hypercarry while still allowing him to be a very good erudition support. Just keep in mind, he's only an erudition support. I admit, I was a bit nonplussed by his kit. While I would have been sad to see Silverwolf rendered irrelevant, or, well, even more irrelevant, I was honestly looking forward to him being like an AoE version of her when I heard about his weakness implants and death mechanics. Then I heard about that ult where they cannot take action, and I thought he'd also be giving Welt a run for his money. Alas, none of that was to be. But now I am quite excited for what he is, an erudition hypercarry that uses weakness implant as a clever gimmick for his own damage amplification, and who can do some pretty good work as a support for other erudition hypercarries. Does that mean that there are two ways to gear him? Well, kinda, but not really. Whether playing him as a hypercarry or as a sub-DPS support, the best thing you can do for him is increase his damage, and the best way to do that is with 4-piece Scholar Lost in Erudition. He really needs that crit rate from the 2-piece, and the 4-piece is honestly made for him, because the majority of his damage will be from his skill. Plus, he's designed for you to regularly use his ultimate before his skill to ensure maximum buffs from his talented major trace. Pioneer Diver of Dead Waters is also an option, but it's not the best one. Pioneer's crit damage and flat damage bonus are generally outpaced by the amount of skill damage Scholar gives, and so much of Anaxa's damage profile is from his skill that it really adds up. Plus, Pioneer's in a cavern with Watchmaker, which only a couple of characters use, while Scholar's in a cavern with Sacerdos, and freaking everyone wants 2-piece speed. Finally, Eagle of Twilight Line could be a good option, as it's our designated wind set with its wind damage bonus and all. The action advance on ult works well with Anaxa, who wants to ult often, but between the cavern it's in being hot garbage and the impossibility of actually managing to make up for the 3 to 4 substat rolls worth of crit rate you lose out from Scholar, I think it's a lot more hassle than it's really worth. For planers, you'll want Rudolent Arena. Again, the built-in crit rate saves so much crit roll headache, and the increase in basic attack and skill are both useful. Skill, of course, more so. Glamoth is an option, but having to use so many substat rolls on crit rate and speed basically makes it a terrible one. If you're building him for pure fiction, Sigonia the Unclaimed Desolation will be a pretty good get. A little less crit rate than Rudolent, but the 40% crit damage from the secondary effect absolutely makes up for it, and in pure fiction, maxing out stacks is almost immediate. And of course, if you're wanting to build him explicitly for support sub-DPS, you can use any of the supportive sets. Keel, Fleet, or Lushaka give him more team buffing. Vonwak can be useful if he's S1 or E1+, because at that point, he actually can apply debuffs that the rest of his team can use. And Izumo can be useful for his damage as sub-DPS. Just be sure to avoid Penacony. He's legitimately the only Wind Erudition character, so he's not going to be buffing anyone with that. Fortunately, you don't need effect hit rate at all for his debuffs. Unfortunately, with the gear system as it is, you'll probably get effect hit rate all the bloody time anyway, just because RNGesus is a dick. What you will need is a crit rate body, speed boots, wind damage orb, and attack percent rope. Crit rate body is better than crit damage because he doesn't get much crit rate from anywhere else, while he gets a lot of crit damage from his major trace when he's the only erudition character. With the 16% from Rudolent and Scholar, the 12% from his minor traces, and the 32% from a 5-star crit rate body, that's 60% crit rate right there. So he only needs a couple crit rate rolls, and you can focus on speed, attack percent, and crit damage instead. If his ult is so important, shouldn't he use an energy regen rope, you may ask? Nope, I answer definitively. The loss of damage without an attack percent rope is quite severe and is not compensated for by the extra ult uptime. Just stick to an attack percent rope. It's also way less hassle to farm for. For substats, he'll want the usual fare for a DPS: speed, attack percent, crit damage, and a little bit of crit rate. So what about his light cones? Well, while there is obviously a singular standout free-to-play winner, he has a veritable smorgasbord of options. For 5 stars, there is, of course, his signature: Life Should Be Cast to Flames. With it, he gains 10 energy at the start of every turn to complement all his other energy regen, plus 60% damage increase when he implants a weakness, which he always does. As an aside, I want to point out that this is one of those very obviously specifically only for a very particular character kind of signatures, because its damage buff can only be activated by Anaxa, as he is the only erudition character who even can implant weaknesses. At least for now, I guess. Anyway, he also now applies a 12% defense shred to enemies he hits, which means he's actually able to amplify damage outside of erudition teams. Not good amplification, granted, around Welt level, but it's still more than the none he's capable of without it. His free-to-play 5-star option is Eternal Calculus, which can be picked up in the Herta shop if you want, but really, don't bother. It gives a 12% attack bonus from jump, which is nice, and it increases by a further 8% for every enemy hit during an attack. Plus, if you hit 3 or more targets in an attack, you also get 16% speed. Seems great, except the attack percent stacks only last until the next attack, and the speed buff only lasts for 1 turn. So every time you attack, your buffs are changing based on the number of enemies on the field. 52% total attack when there are 5 enemies, so in pure fiction, but only 28% total attack if fighting a boss and a couple of minions. Even if Anaxa's skill bounce always counts as 5 enemies hit, at its best, it is worse than a couple of the 4 stars. I offer it as an option if you have it already and you don't have the 4 stars or something, but I do not recommend it in the slightest. The final 5-star I'll mention is Himiko's signature, Night on the Milky Way. With it, for every enemy on the field, you gain 9% attack up to 5 stacks, a total of 45% attack. And when hitting a weakness-broken enemy, you gain a 30% damage buff for 1 turn. If you have it from a standard banner pull or summit, it's actually an incredible option for pure fiction, but outside of that, it's kinda lackluster with, again, many of the 4 stars outpacing it. Speaking of 4 stars, your absolute best free-to-play 4-star option is going to be the Event Light Cone, the Great Cosmic Enterprise. You get a base 16% attack bonus, already better than Calculus, and for every weakness on an enemy, it increases damage dealt to that enemy by 8%, up to 7 weaknesses. Quite obviously made for Anaxa, who will constantly have the full 56% damage against enemies, particularly when he uses his ult. And it, and all its superimpositions, are 100% free from the anniversary event. There's no telling when it'll make it to the Herta shop, so if you haven't yet, absolutely go get it while you can. There are other 4-star options, of course, they're just mostly not as good. The Day the Cosmos Fell would probably be his next best option. It can be purchased from the Light Cone shop, and it has a 24% attack bonus equip effect, which is pretty great. Its secondary effect is a 40% crit damage bonus when hitting at least 2 enemies with corresponding weakness, which for Anaxa just means wind weakness, and which he'll implant even if they don't have it. So, as long as there are at least 2 enemies on the field, he's pretty much guaranteed the boost from this cone. It's still outclassed by Cosmic Enterprise, though. The Seriousness of Breakfast is also from the shop, and it offers similar power, a 24% damage bonus on equip, and an 8% attack increase for each enemy killed, up to 3, totaling 24% attack. But in practice, it's actually weaker than Cosmos, and again, drastically worse than Cosmic Enterprise. The only 4-star that can surpass Cosmic Enterprise is Genius's Repose at S5, but that's a gotcha cone. It gives a 32% attack bonus and 48% crit damage bonus for 3 turns after defeating an enemy. If you can keep up that bonus consistently, it's actually better than his signature for damage, but you're only likely to maintain that bonus in pure fiction, and you would need S5 of a gotcha cone. The 3 stars have some nice abilities that are surprisingly unconditional, but no matter how good those abilities are, they still only have 3-star base stats. It is absolutely not worth investing resources to level them up when he has plenty of freely accessible 4 stars. Complicated as erudition light cones can get, Anaxa's light cone situation is thankfully quite simple. His best unconditional light cones are his signature and Cosmic Enterprise. They provide their buffs for him at all times, and those buffs also just happen to be nearly the best buffs available. The best buffs are from Milky Way and S5 Repose, but only if you match their conditions, which is only consistently possible in pure fiction. Calculus, Cosmos, and Seriousness are all in the murky area at the bottom, where sometimes they're good if you proc their condition, and which one's better than which changes depending on whether you've met their conditions or not. It's a lot of convoluted nonsense that really just doesn't matter and is not worth bothering with. Cosmic Enterprise is free from the event, unconditionally better than all of them, even Calculus, and just absolutely what you should be using if you don't have his signature and you're not running Milky Way or S5 Repose in pure fiction. In light of this, my free-to-play Husbando recommendation is just to skip his signature and use Cosmic Enterprise. The damage difference between them is not that big, and while his signature does give him some def shred to benefit the rest of the team, it's not enough to make him viable damage amplification for non-erudition teams, and not enough of an improvement for erudition teams to really warrant the 80-ish pulls it would take to get it. He is first and foremost DPS, and that does not change unless you invest heavily into his Eidolons. For instance, his E1, like his light cone, adds def shred to his kit. 16% though, which is a bit more than his S1. It also recovers a skill point the first time he uses a skill, kinda like Harmony MC's free E1, so not that impressive to start. E2 is where it gets a little spicy. When enemies enter the battlefield, they trigger his talent's weakness implant, which is nice. But the biggie is that it also reduces their all-type res by 20%. See, generally speaking, enemies have 20% resistance to all the elements they aren't naturally weak to. When Anaxa implants a weakness, he would normally do nothing to that inherent resistance and only add the weakness to the list of elements the enemy takes toughness damage from. With E2, Anaxa now also adds the 20% res reduction you'd expect from an enemy having a weakness. That's pretty good, and it makes him all the more the AoE Silverwolf his kit seems to want to be. E4 focuses more on his personal damage again, with a 30% attack bonus each time he uses skill, stacking up to 2 times and lasting for 2 turns, so that's effectively a permanent 60% attack bonus. Then, his E6 is, well, I'll tell you the truth, I'm not sure how it works, but all the ways I tried calculations for it seemed quite impressive. The damage dealt by Anaxa is 130% of the original damage. It sounds very similar to RMC's wording for true damage, which I would think means a final 1.3 times multiplier added at the end of all other damage calculations, as if he has true damage calculated into his damage without it actually being true damage. That's pretty sick by itself. But then it also makes both effects of his major trace permanently active, regardless of the number of erudition characters in the team, meaning he can now do hypercarry damage while being a universal support. Now, to be fair, that doesn't in any way increase his ability to be a support, so he's still effectively at the same level of damage amplification he would be at E2. It's just that now his E2 levels of support can also apply to non-erudition teams, which seems like a lot of investment just to basically make him Jiao Cho. The main takeaway is that Anaxa is not a good general damage amplifier unless you're willing to take him to E2 at minimum. However, if you want a damage amp for Jingyuan, Argenti, or other erudition carries, he's absolutely great even at E0, and he only gets better when taken to E2. The thing is, it's just not worth investing in Anaxa to make him better in that very specific niche of erudition support, because you'd be better off using those pulls to invest in someone who can provide damage amplification of the same strength for everyone, including other erudition carries. It's also not worth investing in Anaxa to get him viable outside of that niche, e.g. being able to buff non-erudition characters, because that requires way too much investment just to get him to the level of being competitive with E0 nihility characters, and absolutely too much investment, E6, to get him viable as a harmony substitute of any kind. Lastly, he's not worth investing in for damage, because he's already capable of some very good damage at E0 S0, and because he is a DPS, he'll invariably end up fading out of use, as DPS are wont to do. You're better off saving your pulls for the next shiny new DPS who will inevitably come along. In short, he's just not worth investing in. So, my free-to-play Husbando recommendation is just to get him at E0 S0. The event light cone is really good for him, and the pulls you save can go towards Finon or whoever else you may be looking forward to in the future. If you have an overabundance of pulls, or you really want to invest in him because you very much love him, E0 S1 is a good compromise, since it's easier to get, it improves his damage a great deal more than even his E1 would, and it helps to make him a little bit better as a support. But anything beyond that is, in my opinion, not worth possibly losing out on everyone coming next. Just get him to E0 S0 or E0 S1 and love him for what he is for as long as you are able. And the best way to do that is to give him a good team. His hypercarry teams are the basic sort of thing you'd expect. He can benefit from the action advance and buffs from RMC or Sunday, or both together if you fancy. He also appreciates Jiao Cho for his damage amplifying capabilities. Welt can also be of help with his vulnerabilities, though they're not as strong as Jiao Cho's, but Welt does bring with him a true action delay, which can help keep enemies affected by qualitative disclosure and sublimation for longer. Of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention that, as Anaxa is a normal attack scaling DPS, he can benefit from basically everyone in the Harmony Harem. As a support, Anaxa is mostly only viable with other erudition, Jingyuan, Argenti, or the like. So, for instance, a team core of Jingyuan, Anaxa, Sunday could be fun. I'm actually pretty keen to try that one out myself. But, surprisingly, he can also be pretty useful support with his weakness implant in a break, super break team with Boot Hill, Harmony MC, really anyone who wants to deal toughness damage and break enemies. He'd need at least S1 or E1 to actually contribute to anyone's damage output, but even at E0, everyone being able to contribute to toughness damage is really beneficial to break and super break's whole deal. I'm looking forward to trying out various team comps and seeing just what kind of shenanigans I can get up to with all of his weakness implants. Maybe it'll amount to nothing, but it'll certainly be fun to try. And I am definitely excited to finally have a character that I imagine will help me actually manage 12 stars in pure fiction. Wouldn't that be a treat? But how about you? Are you as swept up as I am by Anaxagoras, or do you think he's just nothing but bluster? Let me know down in the comments. So, there's my take on Anaxa. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it was useful and or entertaining. And if you like this sort of thing, feel free to like and subscribe, hit that notification bell to see when I post another video. My Anaxa pulls will be after this, so maybe you'll want to see how that goes. You can come back for that. In any case, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!